Have you ever stared at a painting that just sold for like $50 million and secretly thought to yourself, I just don't get it?
Oh, I think everyone has had that exact moment.
Right. You are definitely not alone. I mean, picture this. You're walking through a hushed, pristine art gallery.
Oh, yeah. The walls are stark white.
Exactly. Stark white walls, and people are wandering around with their hands clasped firmly behind their backs, doing that, that slow, thoughtful nod.
Universal art gallery nod.
Yes. So you step up to a canvas, and maybe it's this explosion of chaotic colors, or maybe it's just a massive blue square. You look at it and you feel something, like it catches your eye.
Right. It draws you in.
Or, to bring it into our daily reality, you're just mindlessly scrolling on your phone, and you suddenly stop on a striking photo on your feed, you stare at it, but then comes that deeply frustrating, almost claustrophobic feeling.
Because you don't have the words.
Exactly. You just do not have the right words to explain why it holds your attention. You're rendered speechless,
Right.
but not in a, magical, awestruck way.
No, it's more like you're speechless in a way that makes you feel completely locked out of the experience.
Right, like you don't have the password.
It is an incredibly common, almost universal phenomenon. And it's actually a very specific kind of intellectual paralysis.
Intellectual paralysis. I like that phrase.
Well, think about what is happening in your brain in that exact moment. We take in visual information instantaneously, right? Our optic nerves are processing the colors, the geometry, the contrast, and the light in fractions of a millisecond.
Okay, sure.
But when we attempt to bridge the gap between that rapid-fire visual data and verbal communication, we hit a massive cognitive wall. We lack the structural vocabulary.
So we just freeze.
We freeze, and we default to these incredibly empty placeholders. We say, oh, it's nice, or, I like the vibe.
Or it's interesting. I say that one all the time.
Right, and then we just keep walking, or we keep scrolling. And by doing that, we're leaving a profound amount of meaning entirely on the table.
And that intellectual paralysis is exactly what we are dismantling today in this deep dive.
Absolutely.
The material we are diving into is a bit of a Trojan horse, actually. On its surface, it is a transcript from an advanced English language learning curriculum.
Which sounds a bit dry, but...
But it's really not. It's this framework designed to teach vocabulary for art and photography, structured across 4 distinct levels of fluency.
Starting at A2.
Right, starting at A2, which is the most basic foundational level, and climbing all the way up the mountain to C1 and C2.
And those top levels represent absolute mastery and really philosophical critique.
But we want to be clear to you, the listener, we are not here for an ESL lesson.
Far from it. What makes this framework so brilliant is that it inadvertently maps out the cognitive evolution of visual literacy.
Yes, that's the core mission today. We are going to use this linguistic ladder as a psychological tool.
It is a structured methodology that can fundamentally upgrade how you, the listener, actually see, process, and interpret the visual world around you.
Because language dictates perception.
Completely. By giving you the precise words, we are expanding your capacity to experience the image.
I was actually trying to figure out the best way to explain this, and I kept coming back to the idea of developing a palate.
Oh, like for food?
Yeah, think about the very first time you ever tasted wine or coffee or even something like artisanal cheese.
You have no idea what you're doing.
Right. When you are a beginner, your vocabulary is incredibly blunt. You drink a glass of wine and you basically just know if it is sweet or, if it is sour.
Maybe you say, it tastes like grapes.
Exactly. Or it burns a little. But as you learn the language of tasting, as you practice applying specific words to specific sensations, your brain actually begins to isolate those individual elements.
It separates the noise.
Right. Eventually, you aren't just tasting a generic sweetness. You realize you are tasting blackberry or vanilla or leather.
And at the highest levels, a sommelier can literally taste the minerality of the specific soil that grapes are grown in.
Which is wild. But here is the crucial part. The liquid in the glass never changed.
Only your language changed.
Yes. Your language changed, and because your language changed, your sensory reality expanded.
That is the perfect mechanism to describe what we are doing today. The visual world is exactly like that glass of wine.
The painting doesn't change.
The painting on the museum wall or the photograph on your screen remains entirely static. But the words you possess act as the sensory receptors in your brain.
I love that.
The more precise the vocabulary, the deeper the visual taste, so to speak. You stop seeing a blur of color and start seeing a symphony of deliberate choices.
Which brings us to the very beginning of the journey, the A2 level, the foundation.
Relearning how to look.
Yeah. Now, it sounds almost insultingly simple to look at a canvas and say, this is a portrait and it is blue.
It does sound basic.
But this framework argues that this is actually a crucial psychological reset. We are so conditioned to immediately search for profound sociopolitical subtext that we forget to just look at the physical reality of the paint.
Well, the anxiety of the gallery space is very real. We walk in and feel this immense pressure to be profound. We think, if I don't instantly understand the existential dread radiating from this landscape, I must be uncultured.
Like everyone else gets it but me.
Exactly. So we freeze, we try to jump straight to a C2 level of critical theory without having any foundational vocabulary.
We skip all the steps.
Right. And the A2 level forces a hard reset. It gives you profound permission to just be literal.
You literally just identify the creator. Like, is this person a painter or are they a photographer?
It seems basic, but a painting and a photograph represent reality in fundamentally different ways. Recognizing which medium you're engaging with is the mandatory first step in understanding how the creator wants to manipulate you.
Right. The framework separates the mediums distinctly. A painting, a drawing, a photo. Or just using the broader terms, a picture or an image.
And then categorizing the subject matter.
Right. Is it a painting of a person? Okay, we call that a portrait. Is it a painting of the outdoors? That's a landscape.
Simple facts.
Then we move to the basic palette of description. Identifying colors. Blue, yellow, bright, dark. And finally, allowing yourself to form incredibly simple, unpretentious opinions.
Things like, it is beautiful. Or, it makes me feel happy.
Yeah, I want to dwell on that phrase. It makes me feel happy.
It's so pure.
It is. That is a completely valid foundational response to art that we have somehow been trained to view as inadequate.
We think it's not smart enough.
Exactly. The source material gives a perfect example of an A2 interaction. Someone looks at a canvas and says, it's a landscape. I see a big blue sea and a yellow sun. The colors are very bright and it makes me feel happy.
It's a great example.
But let me push back on this, though, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of the artist for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Imagine I just spent 3 years of my life pouring my blood, sweat, tears, and existential trauma into this massive landscape painting. I'm trying to make a statement about climate change or the isolation of the modern soul.
Right, a heavy burden.
And you walk up, look at it for 3 seconds and say, oh, it's a picture of a mountain. It's blue. It makes me happy.
Ouch.
Doesn't that somehow insult the intelligence and the labor of the artist?
It's a completely fair hesitation, but the framework would actually argue the exact opposite.
Really? How so?
Grounding yourself in the literal truth is the inescapable first step to any deep analysis. Think about reading a poem.
Okay.
You cannot understand a complex metaphor if you refuse to first acknowledge the literal objects being used in that metaphor.
Oh, that makes sense.
By stripping away the pressure to sound smart, you are removing your own ego from the viewing experience. You are giving the physical reality of the artist's work the respect of just existing before you try to project your own half-baked intellectual theories onto it.
Wow, okay. It's like clearing the mental cache. You are looking at the blue sea and the yellow sun and allowing them to just be a blue sea and a yellow sun for a moment.
You're calibrating your eyes to the reality in front of you.
Precisely. It is about intellectual humility. You don't need a master's degree in art history to look at a picture and say, this room is dark, and looking at it makes me feel deeply sad.
That is a complete, successful, and profoundly human interaction with art. You have received the transmission.
But of course, once you establish that baseline,
Once your brain has comfortably identified what is in the picture,
human curiosity just takes over. The brain naturally craves order. It wants to know how those things are arranged.
and that natural curiosity pushes us up the ladder. We move from just identifying the objects to mapping the space.
This is what the framework calls the B1 level. Once you've stripped your ego and you're just looking at the shapes, your brain starts demanding structural awareness.
You become an explorer of the image.
This is where we introduce the concept of composition. Composition is the spatial architecture of the image.
And the vocabulary here divides the visual space into 3 distinct zones, operating on an axis of depth.
Right. You have the foreground, which is the very front of the image, closest to the viewer. You have the middle ground, and you have the background, stretching out in the distance.
The example given in the text is classic. It says, in the foreground, there is a small boat. In the background, you can see the mountains.
When I was reading this, it clicked for me in a new way. Understanding composition is like suddenly seeing the scaffolding behind a finished skyscraper.
Oh, I like that.
Because when you just look at a building, you see a solid, impenetrable structure. But when you see the scaffolding, you understand exactly how the steel was connected. You see the intention.
You see how it was built.
Right. Once you learn to look for the foreground and the background, you realize the artist is essentially acting like a traffic cop.
A traffic cop?
Yeah, they are actively, deliberately directing your eyes where to travel.
That traffic cop analogy is the perfect way to understand it. The artist isn't just throwing objects onto a canvas.
Right, it's not random.
No, they're designing an itinerary for your optic nerve. They place the small boat in the foreground with high contrast, so your eye enters the painting right there. That is your starting point.
Oh, interesting.
Then, the lines of the water in the middle ground guide your vision back to the mountains in the background. You are experiencing the painting in the exact chronological sequence the artist engineered for you.
It fundamentally changes your posture toward the art. You aren't just standing there passively letting a blue square hit you in the face.
No, you are walking through the space. You're traveling through the image.
And as you travel, you start noticing how the reality is being rendered. This brings us to the B1 vocabulary of style.
Right. The framework sets up a spectrum. On one far end, you have realistic art. The text notes, this is art that attempts to look like a photograph.
So a faithful, proportional reproduction of physical reality.
Exactly. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have abstract art.
Right, which intentionally abandons the attempt to show reality, relying instead on pure shapes, colors, and textures.
And sitting somewhere along that spectrum are specific artistic movements. The framework drops in a couple of heavy hitters here, specifically mentioning Impressionism and Cubism.
It notes that Impressionism is focused heavily on showing light.
Look at the massive cognitive leap we just made. At the A2 level, we were pointing and saying, the sun is yellow.
Yeah, super basic.
At the B1 level, by introducing style, we are saying the artist is using an impressionist style with rapid, choppy strokes to capture the fleeting, temporary nature of how light actually hits a yellow sun at 4 m.
We move from identifying the noun to identifying the verb.
Exactly. We are looking at the approach to the object.
And that approach, the style, the composition, is what directly manufactures the mood or the atmosphere of the piece. The framework asks us to consider, are we looking at something peaceful and calm or something dramatic and energetic?
There's a great line in the text that says the dark colors and sharp lines create a very dramatic atmosphere.
We really need to pause here and dig into the evolutionary psychology of that statement. Why do dark colors and sharp lines feel dramatic? Why do they make our heart rate tick up just a little bit?
It's not an accident.
No, it's deeply rooted in our biology. Dark colors often represent the night, the unknown, a lack of visual clarity where predators might hide.
And sharp lines evoke jagged edges, thorns, broken glass, sudden chaotic movements.
So the artist is essentially hacking our nervous system.
Completely. They are bypassing our logical, rational brain that knows we are safe in a museum, and they are triggering a primal emotional response.
Wow.
When we use this B1 vocabulary, we are finally naming the tools that caused our physiological reaction. Instead of standing there feeling frustrated and just saying, I don't know, this painting makes me feel tense.
Right. You have the language to say the artist's use of sharp, intersecting lines and a heavy, dark background is deliberately constructing a tense, chaotic atmosphere. You take your power back as a viewer.
You really do.
Which leads us to the ultimate payoff of the B1 level, which is interpretation. The bridge between what the thing is, how it's built, and what it actually means to you.
The framework introduces conversational phrases like, for me, it represents, or maybe it's about.
Let's walk through the abstract painting example from the source material because it orchestrates this progression beautifully.
Yeah, the speakers in the text are looking at a purely abstract piece.
First, they analyze the composition. One speaker notes they appreciate the way the bright colors are balanced against the dark background.
Then they assess the mood, describing the atmosphere as energetic and a little chaotic.
And then, only after laying that scaffolding, they interpret it. Because it feels chaotic and energetic, thanks to those clashing colors, the speaker says, maybe it's about the complexity of modern city life.
Notice how the interpretation isn't just pulled out of thin air to sound pretentious.
No, it makes sense.
It flows directly, logically, from the structural evidence they just gathered. The bright neon colors fighting against the crushing dark background literally enacts the feeling of chaotic energy. And so, interpreting that as modern city life makes total sense.
It's a monumental jump from A2. We went from, it's a picture with blue and yellow, to this abstract balance of bright and dark represents the suffocating chaos of the modern metropolis.
And yet, it doesn't feel like we are faking it.
Not at all. It feels earned. We looked at the colors, we found the foreground, we felt the mood, and then we arrived at the meaning.
That is the empowerment of the B1 level. It gives you the evidence to justify your intuition. You might look at that exact same abstract painting and say, for me, the bright color swallowed by the dark background represents the feeling of deep loneliness.
And someone else says it's city life.
Both of you are entirely valid because both of you can point to the structural mechanics of the painting to defend your interpretation.
Okay, so once you've established that the dark colors create a chaotic mood, and you've interpreted what that means to you, a natural frustration arises.
You want to know more?
Right. You start asking, but wait, how exactly did the artist manipulate me into feeling chaotic? You want to see the literal tools in their hands.
And that pushes us past simple spatial awareness and into the actual mechanics of creation, the B2 level.
Yes. At B2, we elevate from an explorer of the image to a critical analyst. We want to know the how at a mechanical level.
The framework introduces the vocabulary of technique. For a painter, we look at the physical evidence of their body moving across the canvas.
The brush strokes.
Are the brush strokes bold and highly visible? Because when you see a thick, aggressive smear of paint, you are literally seeing the physical energy, maybe the anger or the passion, of the artist's hand frozen in time.
Exactly. Contrast that with brush strokes that are smooth and entirely invisible. An artist who blends their paint perfectly is trying to erase their own presence.
They want the image to look like a window into reality, not a canvas covered in wet pigment. They want the illusion to be seamless.
The B2 vocabulary also highlights the masterful use of light and shadow to create drama.
Often referred to as chiaroscuro in art history, though our framework keeps it grounded in the mechanics of light.
But where this mechanical analysis gets incredibly fascinating is how the framework applies it to photography. Because we all take photos every day.
We all have cameras in our pockets.
Exactly. The B2 level introduces terms like focus, framing, and angle.
Let's unpack those. Focus is the choice of what is sharp and what is blurred. A razor-sharp focus forces you to confront the harsh, gritty details of reality.
Right.
A soft focus blurs the edges, creating a nostalgic, romantic, or dreamlike quality.
Framing is how the photographer positions the subject within the borders of the picture, but the concept of the angle, this is where the psychology gets genuinely manipulative.
The text gives this specific example. It says, the low angle makes the subject look powerful and heroic.
I want to spend some time here because this applies to almost every piece of media we consume.
It is arguably the most common psychological trick in visual media. A camera angle is never, ever just a mechanical choice of where to set up the tripod.
Right. It's not just logistics.
No, it is a deliberate manipulation of the viewer's physical and psychological relationship to the subject.
Think about how politicians are photographed. When a magazine wants a politician to look like a visionary leader, a commander-in-chief, where is the camera?
Always below them.
Exactly. It is down by their waist, pointing up at their face. The low angle.
Because when a photographer shoots from a low angle, looking up at the subject, they are forcing you, the viewer, into a physical position of submission.
You literally have to look up to them.
Right. It triggers the subconscious feeling of a child looking up at an adult, or a peasant looking up at a monarch on a throne. The angle fundamentally dictates authority.
And conversely, if a tabloid wants to destroy a celebrity's image or make them look vulnerable and pathetic after a scandal, they shoot from a high angle looking down on them.
Precisely. You become the giant looking down at the small, fragile subject, without changing the person, without changing their expression. Just by tilting the camera a few degrees, the photographer entirely controls the power dynamic.
It's wild.
When you learn this B2 vocabulary, you start seeing these invisible strings everywhere. You realize how often your feelings of intimidation or pity are being artificially manufactured by a camera angle.
It's like learning a magic trick. Once you know how the illusion works, you can't unsee it. We consume thousands of images a day, and we rarely stop to think, why do I feel small looking at this photo?
And the answer is just physics. The camera was low.
Let's move to the next mechanical tool at the B2 level. Symbolism and motif. This is where physical objects are loaded with larger, abstract ideas. The framework defines a motif as a recurring symbol in an artist's body of work.
The text provides two classic examples. The first is a recurring motif of birds being used to symbolize freedom or escape.
Okay.
The second is a specific type of still life symbolism, a wilting flower sitting on a table as a clear symbol of mortality.
The wilting flower makes sense. It's beautiful, but it's dying. It's a very literal metaphor for time passing.
In art history, that is known as a memento mori, which translates to remember that you must die.
Very uplifting.
Right. By placing a dying flower or a rotting piece of fruit or a skull next to beautiful, opulent things, the artist is injecting a philosophical warning about the fleeting nature of vanity in life itself. It anchors the painting in a deeper meaning.
Let me ask you this. If an artist relies on a recurring motif, let's use the birds representing freedom from the text, at what point does a symbol stop being a profound artistic choice and start becoming a lazy cliche?
That's the danger, isn't it?
Yeah. If I go to a gallery and see another black and white photo of a bird flying away to represent breaking free, I'm probably going to roll my eyes.
And your eye roll is exactly why the B2 level introduces the vocabulary of critique. Once you can spot the mechanics and the symbols, you are tasked with judging their value.
Okay, so we're making judgments now.
The framework gives us the exact words to debate your reaction. When you see those birds, you have to ask yourself, is this image original or is it derivative?
Derivative. That is a heavy, sharp word. The framework defines it as imitating the work of another artist.
In critical circles, calling a piece of art derivative is a devastating insult.
It really is.
It means the work lacks a soul of its own. It is just mimicking the superficial mechanics of something that came before it, hoping to steal some of that original magic.
The source material actually outlines a conversation about this. One speaker says that some critics find a particular photographer's work to be highly derivative of older, more established photographers.
But the other speaker immediately pushes back. They argue, I can see the influence, but I think she has a unique voice. For me, this particular photo is a modern masterpiece.
Masterpiece, of course, being defined as an artist's absolute best work.
This exchange captures the eternal tension of art criticism. Every artist is influenced by the past. Nobody creates in a vacuum. So where exactly is the line between being influenced by history and being derivative of it? When does an homage become a ripoff?
It seems like the difference is whether the artist is just repeating the past or using the past to say something new about the present.
It's a good way to put it.
Which brings us to the other critical terms introduced here. We have provocative, meaning the art intentionally makes you think or feel strong, sometimes uncomfortable emotions, and then the exact opposite, decorative.
Calling a piece of art merely decorative is perhaps the only insult worse than calling it derivative.
It sounds so dismissive, like, oh, it's a very nice painting of a vase, it matches the beige sofa in the hotel lobby perfectly, but it has absolutely nothing to say.
It's visual elevator music.
Exactly, visual elevator music, which stands in stark contrast to the final B2 term, avant-garde. The text defines avant-garde as radical, visionary, and ahead of its time.
But here's my struggle with that word. How do we, as viewers, tell the difference between something that is truly avant-garde and something that is just weird for the sake of being weird?
Right. We've all seen modern art that just looks like garbage super glued to a canvas. How do we know if it's a visionary or just a scam?
That is the ultimate gauntlet for the critic. True avant-garde work breaks the established rules of mechanics and composition because those old rules are no longer capable of expressing a new, modern truth.
Okay, so it has a purpose.
Yes. The avant-garde breaks the rules to push the medium forward. Work that is just weird breaks the rules merely to get your attention, but it has absolutely nothing of substance to say once it has you looking.
It's a difference between a calculated revolution and a toddler throwing a tantrum.
Precisely. But here's the catch. To accurately judge whether something is avant-garde or just a tantrum, you can't just look at the image itself.
You can't.
No, you have to understand the rules that are being broken. You have to understand the historical context, the cultural landscape, and the philosophical underpinnings of why the art exists in the first place.
And that realization that the image alone is no longer enough catapults us to the final frontier. Section 4, the summit. What the framework categorizes as the C1 and C2 level, theory, context, and the gaze.
The highest level.
Right. If the B2 level turned us into a mechanical critic of the image, the C1 level turns us into a philosopher of the entire system.
Once you can expertly critique a painting, the final step is stepping backward to interrogate the culture, the history, and the philosophical institutions that place that canvas in front of you.
We are no longer just deconstructing the image, we are deconstructing the act of looking itself.
Exactly. The framework initiates this absolute highest level of fluency with aesthetics. Aesthetics is the branch of philosophy dealing with the nature of beauty and art.
And the core foundational question of aesthetics is this: What actually makes something beautiful? Is beauty objective, meaning it is a measurable truth built into the fabric of the universe, or is it entirely subjective, living purely in the eye of the beholder?
This is where the source material drops a massive philosophical bomb.
It really does.
It specifically mentions Immanuel Kant. It says Kant's theory of aesthetics attempts to find a basis for objective judgments of taste.
Okay, we really need to unpack this, because Kant is incredibly dense. How do we even begin to entertain the idea of objective taste? It goes against everything we are taught about art being subjective.
It is a massive philosophical mountain to climb. But staying strictly within the parameters of the framework we are given, Kant is trying to solve a deeply frustrating human paradox.
Which is?
We all know logically that what you find beautiful, I might find ugly. You might love a chaotic abstract painting and I might hate it. It seems entirely hopelessly subjective.
Right, it's just personal preference, like preferring chocolate over vanilla.
But Kant notices something strange about human behavior. When I say I like vanilla ice cream, I don't expect you to agree with me. It's just my preference.
Yeah, nobody argues over that.
But when we stand in front of a breathtaking sunset or a tree masterpiece in a museum, and I say that is beautiful, I'm not just saying I like it. Kant argues that when we use the word beautiful, we are speaking as if the object possesses a universal quality.
Wait, really? We demand agreement.
Yes. We actually expect and almost demand that others agree with us. If you look at a majestic sunset and say, "That's ugly," I don't just think you have different tastes, I think there is something wrong with your faculties.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. When we call something beautiful, we are secretly claiming it's a fact, not an opinion.
Exactly. Kant was searching for the underlying mental framework that allows us to make those demands of each other. He wanted to prove that true beauty isn't just a selfish personal preference, but rather a harmony that engages our shared human cognitive faculties in a universal way.
So he was trying to find the mathematical, psychological proof that beauty is a shared human truth.
He was.
So the C1 vocabulary gives us the tools to completely elevate the argument. We are no longer arguing about if the B2 brushstrokes on the B1 composition make a painting beautiful. We are arguing about whether the definition of beauty itself is a biological truth or a cultural fiction.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
And from the philosophy of beauty, the framework shifts into art historical context. How does art actively respond to the past? And we have to talk about the primary example the text provides here because it is legendary in the art world.
Oh, Marcel Duchamp's fountain.
Yes. The text states, Duchamp's fountain was a radical gesture that subverted the very definition of art and challenged the authority of the art institution.
For listeners who might not be familiar with this specific moment in history, Duchamp's fountain was quite literally a standard mass-produced porcelain urinal.
Literally a urinal.
In 1917, he bought it, turned it on its back, signed it with the fake name R. Mutt, and submitted it to an art exhibition that claimed they would accept any work as long as the fee was paid.
I have always loved this story. I think of Duchamp's fountain like a brilliant computer hacker finding an exploit in a video game. But he didn't write better code to win the game. He realized the game engine itself was fundamentally flawed.
The game was the museum.
Exactly. By putting a literal urinal on a pedestal, he was proving that the pedestal, not the porcelain, not the artist's brushstrokes, not the composition, the pedestal itself was generating the value.
That is a phenomenal analogy. He didn't bring better art to the institution. He hacked the mechanism of the institution itself.
Yes.
The framework uses the word subvert. To subvert means to undermine the power and authority of an established system. Duchamp weaponized the context of the museum against the museum.
He proved that the institution of art, the wealthy critics, the gallery owners were the ones arbitrarily deciding what was and wasn't art.
He forced the C1 level conversation into existence. He proved that context is just as important, if not more important, than the physical object.
And speaking of context, the framework then moves from questioning the authority of the museum to questioning the very perspective of the viewer.
This is critical theory.
Right. It introduces critical theory, specifically highlighting a concept called the male gaze. Now, I want to frame this exactly as the curriculum does. We are looking at a highly influential analytical lens from the 1970s. The source text explicitly brings up Laura Mulvey's seminal essay on this concept.
Right. And strictly relying on the provided text, the framework defines the male gaze as a concept from feminist theory that describes the way women are depicted in visual arts from a masculine, heterosexual perspective.
And the text makes a point to note that Laura Mulvey's essay was seminal, meaning it was groundbreaking and strongly influenced all later developments in the field.
And that it completely reconfigured how we analyze classical Hollywood cinema.
So if we unpack this concept as an analytical tool, the idea is that when we watch a classic Hollywood film, the camera itself is not a neutral observer.
Far from it. The theory argues that the camera is an active participant that assumes a very specific identity. In classical cinema, the director, the cameraman, and the presumed audience were overwhelmingly male.
Okay, so the lens itself has a gender.
Therefore, the way the camera moves, the way it lingers on a female character's body, the way it frames her in relation to the male protagonist, all of it is constructed through a masculine lens.
So even if I, as a viewer, am not a man, when I sit in the dark theater and look through the lens of that camera, I am essentially being forced to adopt that specific perspective.
Exactly. At the C1 level, acquiring vocabulary like the male gaze allows you to interrogate the invisible biases built into the machinery of image making.
It demands that you ask not just what is in the B1 framing, but whose perspective you are being forced to inhabit when you look through that frame.
It is the profound realization that the act of looking is never, ever neutral.
It's like waking up one day and realizing the glasses you've been wearing your entire life have a subtle yellow tint to them. You didn't even know you're seeing a yellow-tinted world because it was all you ever knew, until someone gave you the vocabulary to describe the tint itself.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of the lenses through which we view the world, the framework tackles one last massive paradigm: technology's impact. Specifically, how the proliferation, the rapid exponential increase of digital images has fundamentally altered our relationship with visual art.
This is arguably the most urgent and relevant C1 topic for our modern daily lives. The text anchors this discussion in the work of Walter Benjamin, a cultural critic who wrote a famous essay about art in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Benjamin predicted that the infinite copying and reproduction of art would inevitably diminish what he called the aura of the original physical work.
Let's define that. What exactly is the aura?
Right. Think about history before mass media. If you lived in the 1700s and you wanted to see a famous masterpiece, you had to physically travel to the specific church in Rome or the specific gallery in Paris where it lived.
Standing in front of it was a singular, physical, almost religious experience. You were sharing physical space with the canvas that the master touched.
The painting had an aura of absolute uniqueness. It existed in one specific coordinate of time and space.
But today, that singularity is completely gone. I can pull up a pixel-perfect, ultra-high-definition reproduction of the Mona Lisa on my phone while I'm sitting on the subway. I can see it printed on a coffee mug or a t-shirt.
And Benjamin argued that this infinite copying, this relentless reproduction, strips the original work of its unique magic. It dilutes the aura.
When you have seen a painting 10,000 times on a screen, finally seeing it in person often feels like a letdown. It feels like you were just looking at a physical printout of a digital file.
But the framework also points out the vital flip side to Benjamin's anxiety. It states that while reproduction diminished the aura, it has also democratized access to it.
That's the trade-off.
Sure, pulling up a Van Gogh on my iPhone isn't as magically singular as standing alone in a museum in Amsterdam, but I also don't have to be a wealthy aristocrat who can afford a plane ticket to Amsterdam to see it.
Right. A kid with a cheap smartphone anywhere in the world can study the greatest aesthetic achievements in human history.
The aura of exclusivity is dead, but the accessibility is universal.
Which perfectly sets up the final philosophical inquiry presented in our source text: the function of art today.
The framework leaves us with this heavy statement. It says, the ongoing tension between art as a market commodity and art as a form of critical social commentary defines much of the contemporary art world.
We have to ask what the point of all this is. Is art just a hyperinflated, unregulated asset class for billionaires to park their wealth in? Is it just a commodity to be traded in Freeport storage units?
Or is it a vital functioning tool for social change and critical commentary?
Or, as the text also gently suggests, is it fundamentally a form of personal therapy, a way to process human emotion?
It is a massive, endlessly unresolved tension. Think about the journey we've taken. The B1 level asks us, what does this abstract painting mean to you personally?
The C1 level turns that lens outward and asks, what does the existence of this multi-million-dollar painting mean to global society? It is an incredible journey of scale.
It really is. This language learning framework turned out to be a masterclass in interdisciplinary thinking. We've pulled from geometry, evolutionary biology, history, feminist theory, and digital philosophy.
We evolve from passively staring at an image to aggressively analyzing the invisible systems that govern the act of looking itself.
We've built the scaffolding.
Exactly, we did.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's trace the arc of this incredible climb one last time. We started at the absolute bottom, the A2 level. You were standing in the gallery, feeling that anxiety, and you learned to simply observe without ego.
You identify a landscape, you spot a portrait.
You name the blue sky, the bright yellow color. You ground yourself in the literal physical reality of the paint.
Then you stepped up to B1, you became an active explorer of the structure. You mapped out the foreground, the middle ground, and the background.
You identified the artist acting as a traffic cop. You recognized the approach, labeling styles like impressionism or abstract art.
You allowed the sharp lines to trigger an emotional mood, and you used all that structural evidence to offer your personal interpretation of what the piece represents.
Then, at B2, you became the mechanic and the critic. You analyzed the aggression of the painter's brushstrokes.
You spotted the photographer manipulating you by dropping to a low angle or using a soft focus.
You decoded the wilting flower as a memento mori. And you judged the final product, debating whether the artist was a derivative copycat or if they had created a truly provocative avant-garde masterpiece.
And finally, you ascended to the C1 and C2 summit. You transcended the image and became a cultural theorist.
You wrestled with Kant over the existence of objective beauty. You watched Duchamp subvert the authority of the museum with a urinal.
You put on the tinted glasses of critical theory to interrogate the biases of the gaze.
And you weighed the loss of the physical aura against the democratization of digital access. We took that initial feeling of being utterly speechless and deeply frustrated, and we completely dismantled it. You now have the keys to the kingdom.
You really do.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought, something to really chew on that builds on everything we've unpacked today, but takes it one step further.
Okay, I'm ready.
At the very end of our deep dive, we talked about Walter Benjamin. His assertion that infinite digital reproduction diminishes the aura of the original physical work. Because we can see a million copies of a painting on our phones, the original canvas loses its unique, singular magic.
The physical pilgrimage is no longer required. The magic is diluted by mass distribution.
Right. But if this entire deep dive has been about the power of learning a structured language to talk about what we see, perhaps the ultimate aura doesn't actually exist in the physical painting itself anymore.
What do you mean?
Think about it. In a digital age where we're constantly drowning in an avalanche of fleeting images, where we rarely ever stand in front of the physical originals, perhaps the true surviving aura of art now lives entirely in the language we use to describe it.
Oh, wow.
Maybe the magic isn't the dried paint on the canvas. Maybe the true magic, the true irreplaceable aura, is the profound intellectual and emotional connection forged between two people when they finally find the exact right words to share what they see.
That is a stunning reframing of the entire concept. The artwork, whether it's a physical canvas in Paris or a JPEG on your phone, is just the catalyst. The language, the shared vocabulary of foregrounds, angles, aesthetics, and moods is where the actual singular human connection occurs.
Exactly. The words are the aura. So the next time you are standing in front of a baffling painting in a quiet museum, or the next time you stop on a striking, chaotic photo on your endless social media feed, do not let yourself be rendered speechless.
Do not just say it's nice and keep walking.
Use the ladder we built today. Start at the bottom. Strip your ego, look at the colors, and climb your way up into the structure, the mechanics, and the philosophy. Keep looking, keep thinking, and keep finding the words to share your perspective with the world. So, I want to take you back to 1898, just for a second.
Okay, 1898, setting the scene.
Right. So, the USS Maine, which is this American naval ship, it suddenly explodes in the harbor of Havana, Cuba.
A massive historical flashpoint, yeah.
Exactly. And, to this day, historians actually still debate the exact cause. Like, a lot of them point to this just being an internal, totally accidental explosion in the coal bunker.
Right, a tragic accident, not an attack.
But the day after it happened, the big newspapers of the time, I'm talking William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer, they did not wait for any kind of official investigation.
No, patience wasn't exactly their business model.
Exactly. They just instantly printed these massive sensationalist headlines, basically accusing the Spanish of a deliberate attack. I mean, they even ran these totally fabricated illustrations of torpedoes hitting the ship.
Just completely manufacturing the visual evidence.
Yeah, Because at the end of the day, it was a circulation war. They just wanted to sell papers. And those headlines, they whipped the American public into such an absolute frenzy that it essentially pushed the United States right into the Spanish-American War.
It's incredible when you think about the raw power of that. I mean, there's the famous quote, right?
Yeah.
It might be apocryphal, but Hearst supposedly sent a telegram to his photographer in Cuba saying, you furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war.
Yes, I'll furnish the war. And, we look back at that era of what they called a yellow journalism, and we treat it like this historical cautionary tale, like, oh, look how naive people used to be.
Right, like we somehow evolved past that.
But consider this for a second. It took Hearst days, like actual days of printing and physically distributing those papers on trains and wagons to incite a nation.
The friction of the physical world.
Yeah. But today,
yeah,
a piece of fabricated outrage, something perfectly engineered to just hijack your nervous system, it can reach 50 million people on social media in, under 3 hours.
Oh, easily. Sometimes even faster.
And so, you wake up, you grab your phone off the nightstand, and before your feet even hit the floor, you are just bombarded. It's this digital ecosystem that is infinitely more sophisticated and, I would argue, potentially way more dangerous than anything Hearst could have ever dreamed up.
It's a completely different scale of manipulation.
Right. So how do we actually process this? As citizens, how do we build some kind of internal architecture to analyze this daily avalanche of information without just being totally manipulated by it?
Well, it really requires a fundamental shift in how we view our own consumption habits.
What do you mean by that?
So we tend to treat reading the news kind of like looking out a window. You assume the glass is perfectly transparent and you're just observing the weather outside.
Oh, I like that. Like, oh, it's raining facts today.
Exactly. But the reality is the glass is never actually transparent. It's a highly engineered lens. And sometimes it acts like a magnifying glass.
Right.
It blows something tiny out of proportion. Sometimes it's a funhouse mirror distorting reality. And sometimes it's like a prism that just completely fractures the light into entirely different colors.
Wow. Yeah.
So to genuinely understand the world today, we have to stop just passively staring at the weather. We have to start actively examining the properties of the glass itself. We really need to deconstruct the actual machinery of the modern information ecosystem.
And that right there is the mission for our deep dive today. We are taking you on a multi-level journey through the entire architecture of news consumption.
From the ground up.
Exactly. We're going to start at the foundational mechanics, how a story is assembled under these intense modern pressures. We'll look at the psychological tricks they embed right into the headlines.
Really sneaky stuff.
Yeah. And then we'll get into the complex mechanisms of modern disinformation campaigns, examine some really severe ethical dilemmas faced by journalists, like what happens when they get a hold of actual state secrets. And finally, we're going to completely deconstruct the attention economy algorithms that are, frankly, actively fragmenting our shared reality.
It's really about upgrading your cognitive software to match the sheer complexity of this digital environment.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Because the tools we use to evaluate, like a nightly television broadcast back in 1995, those are fundamentally insufficient for navigating a landscape that's now dominated by algorithmic curation and artificial intelligence and, state-sponsored bot networks.
We need a better toolkit. So let's start with the basic building blocks first, the real ground floor, because the very nature of how a story gets delivered to you has undergone this massive seismic structural shift.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, right. Like historically, we had what you'd call appointment viewing. You received a physical newspaper and it had finite column inches. Or you sat down and watched a 30-minute evening broadcast, and they only had time for a finite number of segments.
There were physical constraints on the information.
Exactly. The constraints were physical. But today, the digital space is just infinite. You can scroll forever. But the resource that is fiercely scarce now is human attention.
Right. Our attention is the bottleneck.
And that completely alters the actual function of the headline. We used to think of a headline as just a helpful summary of the article, like a front door to a house. It tells you if you're walking into a local story or world news or sports.
A polite invitation inside.
Yeah. But today, a headline isn't a summary. A headline is a lab-engineered fishing lure.
That is a brutally accurate assessment of the modern digital newsroom. The process behind those headlines is now entirely data-driven.
How does that actually work behind the scenes?
Well, when a major digital publication releases an article now, they don't just, write one clever headline and hope for the best.
Like the old days of the gruff newspaper editor.
Right, yelling across the newsroom. No, they utilize highly sophisticated A/B testing or multivariate testing. So the publishing software might automatically generate 10 entirely different variations of a headline and maybe pair those with 10 different cover images.
Wait, really? 10 at once?
Oh, yeah. And then these variations are deployed simultaneously to different segments of the publication's live readership.
So, I might see a totally different headline than you see for the exact same article at the exact same time.
Exactly. And the software acts as this totally ruthless referee, tracking the metrics in real time.
What kind of metrics are they looking at?
It measures the click-through rate, obviously, but also the engagement velocity, how fast people are clicking, and the dwell time, which is how long a reader actually stays on the page after they click.
Okay, so it's incredibly precise.
Very. And within minutes, literally minutes, the algorithm identifies which specific headline and image combination is extracting the absolute maximum amount of attention from the audience. Then it automatically swaps out all the less successful versions.
So the winning headline just takes over.
Right. It becomes the permanent front facing the rest of the public. But the crucial, slightly terrifying mechanism to understand here is that the algorithm is entirely agnostic to nuance.
It doesn't care about the truth.
It doesn't care about accuracy. It doesn't care about context. It optimizes solely for psychological activation. It actively finds the combination of words that strikes the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotion center, with the absolute greatest force.
Which means the headline that actually survives this whole testing phase is almost always the one that leans heaviest into sensationalism.
Precisely.
Wow, so we are effectively, by clicking, we are training the publishing algorithms to feed us our own anxiety.
We're clicking our way into a panic.
Yeah. But, okay, let's say you click past that highly optimized lure. Now you enter the architecture of the actual story itself. And, the classic foundation we're all taught in school is the 5 Ws, right?
Right, the old reliable 5 Ws.
Who, what, where, when, and why. But I feel like in this era of rapid response journalism, and especially now with AI-generated content, maintaining that basic factual foundation seems incredibly fragile.
It is fragile. It's under immense pressure.
Like just establishing what used to be the straightforward part. Today, establishing what happened feels like a massive investigative hurdle all on its own.
It really is, because the burden of verification has fundamentally shifted.
How so?
Well, think about the past. The primary challenge of journalism used to be access. Just getting a reporter physical access to the closed-door room where the policy decision was made, or getting them a flight to the actual war zone where the event was happening.
Right, getting boots on the ground.
Exactly. But today, we don't have a lack of access. We actually suffer from an overabundance of access, paired with a massive crisis of authenticity.
That's a great way to put it.
So if a video surfaces on social media, and it appears to show, say, a violent protest breaking out in a foreign capital, the modern journalist's first job is no longer to just summarize what's in the video.
Because they don't even know if it's real yet.
Exactly. Their first job is to conduct deep forensic analysis. I mean, they have to use reverse image searches. They have to scrutinize the file metadata. They might even have to geolocate the background landmarks against Google satellite imagery, or analyze the angles of the shadows in the video to make sure the sun is in the right place.
Just to ensure the video wasn't actually shot 3 years ago in a completely different country.
Right. Or entirely generated by AI yesterday.
And that is a massive amount of work just to establish the where and the when. But for me, the most critical load-bearing pillar of any news story is always the why.
Oh, absolutely. The why is the context.
The why is the connective tissue of the world. If a central bank suddenly raises interest rates, the who, what, and when can be communicated to you in a 2-sentence push notification on your phone.
Sure. Bank raises rates today. Done.
Right. But the why did they do it, and what does it mean for my mortgage, that requires a really deep understanding of macroeconomic pressures and supply chain logistics and, historical inflation data.
It requires actual expertise.
And the problem is that the why is inherently slow. It takes time to research and write. And in the digital ecosystem we were just talking about, time is the absolute enemy of virality.
It is. The algorithm will not wait for you to do your research.
So what happens?
Well, this creates a really dangerous void. When a major event occurs, there is an immediate, intense vacuum of information. People are shocked, and they desperately want to know why it happened.
Naturally. We want to make sense of the chaos.
But because rigorous, responsible journalism takes time, Reputable outlets often cannot provide that why for several hours or sometimes even days.
They're still checking the shadow angles on the video.
Exactly. And that vacuum gets instantly filled by bad actors, by extreme partisans and conspiracy theorists who are completely unconstrained by the need for any factual verification.
Because they're just making it up.
Right. They can invent a super compelling, highly emotional why in 5 minutes that perfectly fits their agenda, and they could broadcast it globally.
And people just eat it up because they're starved for an explanation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by the time the slow, meticulous, journalistic why finally arrives a day later, the public has already consumed, shared, and deeply internalized the fabricated narrative. The truth is essentially arriving to a party that's already over.
Man, that is so frustrating. So let's look at the mechanics of how a journalist actually attempts to construct that accurate narrative under all this intense pressure, because the synthesis of a real story relies heavily on a specific cast of characters, right?
Yes, it's a collaborative effort.
When you dissect any major investigative piece, you consistently see this really interesting tension between two primary types of sources. You have the eyewitness and you have the expert.
Right. The ground level and the balcony view.
Exactly. And these aren't just like different people to quote to make the article longer. They represent two fundamentally different epistemological ways of understanding an event.
That's a great point. They offer entirely different data sets. So the eyewitness provides localized, visceral data.
Right.
Consider something massive, like the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Okay, perfect example.
An eyewitness source in that scenario is the rig worker who actually survived the initial blowout.
Right, the guy who is literally on the deck.
Yes. And their testimony provides the terrifying, chaotic reality of the explosion. They can tell you about the deafening sounds, the intense heat, the immediate, horrific human cost of what just happened.
It's just raw, unfiltered reality.
It is an invaluable primary source, but it is inherently limited by their physical vantage point.
Because they only know what they saw.
Exactly. The worker on the deck does not know about the systemic, mechanical failures of the blowout preventer on the ocean floor, right? Nor do they understand the complex oceanographic currents that are about to spread millions of gallons of oil across the Gulf.
Right, so they possess the micro-reality, but they are completely blind to the macro-reality.
Exactly. So to map that macro-reality, the journalist has to bring in the expert.
Right, the person with the spreadsheet.
Yeah, the oceanographer, the petroleum engineer, the government regulatory analyst. Now, the expert was nowhere near the Gulf of Mexico when the rig actually exploded, but they have the abstract systemic models to predict the environmental devastation and to explain exactly why the machinery failed.
So a robust, truly valuable piece of journalism has to synthesize both of those things.
It has to. It anchors the abstract cold data of the expert in the visceral human reality of the eyewitness. That's how you build complete picture.
But, actually consuming that synthesis day after day, especially when the subject matter is catastrophic, like an oil spill or a war, it takes a profound psychological toll on the reader.
Oh, a massive toll.
I think we really need to look at the emotional resonance of news consumption. Because the phrase doom scrolling, we toss it around like it's just a cultural joke.
Right, like a bad habit.
Yeah, like biting your nails. But it actually describes a very specific, deeply ingrained behavioral loop that is rooted in human evolutionary biology.
We are talking about the negativity bias here.
Explain that for the listener, because I think this is so key to understanding why we feel so exhausted by the news.
So evolutionarily speaking, early humans who paid intense attention to negative stimuli were much more likely to survive.
Okay, so like looking out for danger.
Right. If you're a caveman and you hear a rustle in the bushes that might be a predator, you need to focus on that instantly.
You can't ignore it.
Exactly. The early human who ignored the rustling bush to stare at a beautiful sunset, they probably got eaten. They didn't pass on their genes.
Right, so we are the descendants of the anxious cavemen.
We are. Our nervous systems are completely hardwired to prioritize threat detection above all else.
We are basically just walking threat scanners.
That is exactly what we are. And the modern information ecosystem has essentially hijacked this evolutionary trait.
Because it knows what gets our attention.
Exactly. When you open a news app, the algorithm serves you a buffet of global threats. You get economic instability, political polarization, natural disasters, crime.
That's a wall of terrible things.
And your brain interprets this digital feed as a highly threatening physical environment, which instantly spikes your cortisol levels. Your body's preparing for a fight or flight response.
But you're not fighting or fleeing.
No, you are just sitting on your couch scrolling. You're physically perfectly safe, but you're trapped in this intake loop, just absorbing the immense emotional weight of these global crises without any physical mechanism to resolve the anxiety.
That is terrifying when you put it like that. And I know people often try to counter this by, explicitly seeking out good news sites, or they try to carefully curate their social media feeds to only include uplifting human interest stories or puppy videos.
People try to balance their media diets.
Right. But honestly, it always feels a bit like putting a Band-Aid on a systemic wound. Because if the architecture of the delivery system itself is inherently optimized for threat detection, we can't just passively consume it and hope for the best.
No, passivity is dangerous.
We have to actively build a critical lens. And this is usually where the conversation kind of hits a wall with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because you bring this up and someone will inevitably say, well, look, the media is just biased anyway. There's no such thing as an objective reporter, so why even bother?
Right, the old everyone is biased argument.
Exactly. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I always say that assertion is the starting line for true media literacy, not the finish line.
I love that.
Because the concept of pure Platonic objectivity, the idea of a reporter acting as a completely neutral, robotic conduit of perfect truth. It's an impossible standard. It doesn't exist.
Because reporters are human beings.
Exactly. Every human being possesses cognitive biases.
Yeah.
They are shaped by their upbringing, their education, their socioeconomic status, their geography.
Even their age, yeah.
Every single editorial decision ever made involves a subjective value judgment.
I mean, even the choice of what not to cover is a massive, massive exercise of bias.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a really crucial concept in media theory called agenda setting theory.
Okay, what is that?
The classic summary of agenda setting theory is this. The news media may not be successful in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about.
Oh, wow. What to think about.
Right. Agenda setting is a massive structural force. Yeah. So if a major national newspaper decides to dedicate its front page to a specific political scandal for, say, 10 consecutive days.
It's all anyone sees.
Right. They are actively signaling to the entire political apparatus and to the general public that this specific scandal is the most critical issue currently facing the nation.
Even if maybe it isn't.
Right. And here's the kicker. They might actually report the raw facts of that scandal with rigorous accuracy. They might maintain strict reporting standards, spell everyone's name right, get the dates perfect.
So they aren't lying.
No, they aren't lying. But the sheer volume and prominence of the coverage is a highly subjective choice that fundamentally alters the national conversation. It forces that topic to the top of everyone's mental priority list.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so if pure objectivity is a complete myth, and everyone is setting an agenda, how on earth do we evaluate credibility? How do we know who to trust?
Well, we have to stop looking for perfection and start looking at the institutional mechanisms a news organization uses to mitigate its own inherent biases.
Okay, mechanisms, like what?
It's the difference between, say, a highly partisan blog that just regularly publishes angry opinion as if it were fact, and a reputable news organization that utilizes multiple layers of editorial oversight.
I sometimes like to use this analogy. A short, hyper-partisan news brief on social media is like a fast food snack, right?
Yeah.
It's cheap, it's quick, it tastes good in the moment, but it's terrible for you.
Right, empty calories.
But in-depth, rigorously edited investigative journalism is like a slow-cooked meal. It takes a long time to prepare, it requires expensive ingredients like time and expertise, but it actually nourishes you.
That's exactly it. Credibility in journalism is not defined by never making a mistake. It is defined by process, and more importantly, by transparency.
Transparency.
Yes. A highly credible institution has a rigorous, independent fact-checking apparatus. They physically require the reporters to verify controversial claims with multiple independent sources before they can hit publish.
Right.
But honestly, the ultimate acid test for a news organization's credibility is simply how they behave when they get something wrong.
The correction policy.
Yes. When a reputable organization publishes an error, and they inevitably will, they issue a public, highly visible correction. They explicitly explain to the reader what was wrong, what the truth actually is, and how the error occurred in the first place.
They own it.
They own it because their loyalty is to the accuracy of the record. But a low credibility source, a partisan echo chamber, or a sensationalist tabloid.
They just delete it and pretend it never happened.
Exactly. They will silently delete the inaccurate post.
Or
Or frankly, what's even worse, they will double down on the error if it happens to serve their preferred political narrative.
right, they just pivot and say, well, it could have been true.
Yes, because they prioritize narrative preservation over factual accuracy.
And man, this friction between narrative and accuracy, it leads us directly into the mechanics of the modern minefield. We need to talk about the distinction between misinformation and disinformation.
A critical distinction.
Because I hear these terms used completely interchangeably by the public all the time, but the mechanistic difference between them is just vast, right?
They're entirely different animals.
So break it down for us.
Okay, so misinformation is fundamentally the honest mistake.
The typo.
Right. It's the tired reporter misinterpreting a complex statistic while rushing to meet a deadline. Or it's, your aunt sharing an outdated graphic on Facebook without realizing it's from 5 years ago.
Nobody is trying to be evil.
Exactly. There is no malicious intent. It is simply a failure of accuracy.
Okay.
But disinformation. Disinformation is a failure of morals. It is the dark arts.
The dark arts, I like that.
Disinformation is weaponized falsehood. It is information that is manufactured from scratch and deployed deliberately, intentionally to manipulate public opinion, to damage a political opponent, or to actively undermine the public's faith in democratic institutions.
It's an attack.
It is an attack.
Yeah,
and it's crucial to understand that modern disinformation campaigns rarely look like just a single, obvious, easily debunked lie.
Right, it's not a cartoon villain twirling a mustache.
No, they operate through a highly sophisticated, complex mechanism that analysts often refer to as information laundering.
Information laundering, like money laundering, but for lies.
Exactly. You are trying to take dirty, fabricated information and wash it through the system until it looks clean and legitimate.
Okay, I really want to dig into this. How does that laundering process actually work in practice? Give me the step-by-step mechanics of how a totally fabricated story makes it all the way to the mainstream news.
Okay, let's trace the pipeline. It almost always begins in the dark, obscure corners of the internet. We're talking about a fringe message board or an encrypted anonymous forum.
Someplace where nobody uses their real name.
Right. And a bad actor, let's say a state-sponsored intelligence operative from a foreign country, or even a domestic political operative, they will post a fabricated document.
Like what?
Like a highly realistic forged memo that appears to show a prominent politician engaging in deeply corrupt behavior.
Okay, so they plant the lie in the dirt.
Yes, the seed is planted. Next comes the amplification phase. The operative doesn't just wait for people to find it. They actively activate a massive network of automated bot accounts on major social media platforms.
So thousands of fake accounts.
Exactly. And these bots operate in a coordinated swarm. They begin sharing the forged document simultaneously tens of thousands of times an hour, and they utilize a specific, highly optimized hashtag.
To game the system.
Right. Because the sheer volume and the nest velocity of these posts, it completely tricks the social media platform's trending algorithm.
Because the algorithm doesn't know it's fake.
Exactly. The algorithm doesn't know how to read the document. It just registers a massive, unprecedented spike in human engagement around this specific topic.
It registers velocity, not truth.
Precisely. So what does the platform do? It places that hashtag right in its trending sidebar, officially broadcasting it to millions of regular, authentic users.
Oh, wow. So now real people see it.
Yes. Now authentic humans begin clicking on it, they read the fake memo, they react with genuine outrage, and they begin sharing it themselves.
They do the work for the bots.
Exactly. The artificial momentum has successfully generated organic momentum. This is the critical transition point in the laundering process.
Okay, so now it's trending everywhere. What's the next step?
Finally, a mid-tier partisan news site. One of those sites that's always incredibly hungry for cheap traffic. They see the trend, and they write an article about the outrage.
But wait, do they verify the memo first?
No, that's the genius of it. Their headline isn't, "Here's a corrupt memo." Their headline is, "The internet is outraged over leaked memo."
They're reporting on the outrage itself, not the underlying fact. They're creating a buffer.
Exactly. They wash their hands of the truth of the memo, but they still get the clicks for the drama. And once that mid-tier site publishes it, now the mainstream, highly reputable news organizations are essentially forced to address it. because it is entirely dominating the cultural conversation.
Right, everyone at the water cooler is talking about it.
So the mainstream paper might write a very careful, well-researched article officially debunking the memo.
Saying it's a fake.
Yes, but the damage is already done. The lie has been successfully laundered from an anonymous fringe forum all the way to the front page of the mainstream news cycle.
That is just, the cognitive load required for an average citizen to unravel that entire chain of manipulation on a Tuesday morning before work, it's immense. It's basically impossible.
It is impossible for an individual. It is an asymmetric warfare of information.
Asymmetric warfare?
Yes. There is a psychological concept called truth default theory.
What's that?
It suggests that human beings essentially default to believing that communication is honest unless there is a very overt, screaming reason to suspect deception.
Which makes sense, right? Like, if we had to meticulously verify every single statement anyone ever made to us all day long, society would just grind to a total halt.
Exactly. We rely on a baseline of trust just to function in society. Disinformation architects actively exploit this fundamental human trait.
Because it's so much easier to create a lie than to debunk one.
Exactly. Think about the math. It takes an operative maybe 10 seconds to type a prompt and generate a hyper-realistic, completely fake image of a protest using artificial intelligence.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
Yeah.
But it takes a team of professional forensic journalists 10 hours to meticulously analyze the pixels and definitively prove to the public that it is fake. The asymmetry of effort is just staggering.
And this is exactly why the institutional weight of the press is so incredibly vital, right? Like, we can't do this alone as individuals. We need these institutions to act as a bulwark against that massive asymmetry.
Right. And this perfectly elevates our discussion from, the mechanics of a single article to the grand systemic role of journalism in a democracy.
We have to examine the concept of the press as the fourth estate.
Yes, the fourth estate.
It's this grand idea, right? The unofficial fourth branch of government existing alongside the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, specifically designed to act as a watchdog over all of them.
It sounds incredibly majestic on paper.
It does. It sounds very noble. But the legal and ethical reality of actually being that watchdog is incredibly messy.
It is incredibly messy. And honestly, the protections for this fourth estate are currently being tested in unprecedented ways.
Give me an example.
Well, for instance, in the United States, there are certain shield laws, right? These are laws specifically designed to protect journalists from being forced by a judge to reveal their confidential sources in a court of law.
Right, so whistleblowers feel safe coming forward.
Exactly. But the digital age has completely fractured the basic definition of who actually gets to claim that protection.
Oh, because who is a journalist anymore?
Exactly. It's a profound legal crisis. Think about it. 50 years ago, a journalist was very easily identifiable. They carried a press pass, they worked in a building that said newspaper on the front, or they worked for a recognized broadcast network.
The institutional affiliation was obvious.
Right, the institution granted them the legal shield. But today, if an independent writer operating a solo Substack newsletter out of their living room receives a leak of classified documents from a government whistleblower, does that solo writer qualify for the protections of the fourth estate?
That is a really tough question.
If a podcaster conducts a 3-year investigative research project, are they a journalist in the eyes of the law? Can they be subpoenaed?
The boundaries have just completely dissolved.
Oh, really have.
But, regardless of who is holding the pen or the microphone, the ethical dilemmas inherent in actually playing that watchdog role remain just excruciating.
They are the hardest decisions in the world.
Because being a watchdog fundamentally requires an adversarial relationship with power.
You can't be friends with the people you are investigating.
Exactly. And the ultimate stress test of that adversarial relationship, I think, is the decision of whether or not to publish highly classified government secrets.
Well, without a doubt. When national security enters the chat, the stakes become existential.
I think we can really examine the mechanics of this ethical tightrope by looking at what is probably one of the most consequential journalistic decisions in modern history.
The Pentagon Papers.
The publication of the Pentagon Papers in 1971. This is just the perfect case study.
It really is the gold standard for this dilemma.
For the listener, just for some quick context, Daniel Ellsberg, who was this military analyst, he essentially photocopied 7,000 pages of top secret documents. And these documents detailed the hidden history of the United States political and military involvement in Vietnam.
Highly, highly classified material.
Right. And these documents proved unequivocally that the government had systematically lied to the public and to Congress about both the scope and the success of the war.
For years.
For years. And Ellsberg took this massive risk, and he leaked these documents to the New York Times.
Right. Now, I always tell people, put yourself in the room with the editors and the legal counsel of the New York Times on the day those boxes of documents arrived.
Sweating bullets, I imagine.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because this was not some abstract theoretical debate in a journalism class. It was a crisis of absolute existential stakes for the newspaper and for the country.
Because they're holding dynamite.
Exactly. So on one side of the ledger, you have the fundamental constitutional mandate of the Fourth Estate, which is the public's absolute undeniable right to know that their own government is actively deceiving them.
Especially when that deception is costing thousands of human lives in a massively escalating overseas conflict.
Right. The watchdog is legally and morally bound to bark loudly in that scenario.
They have to publish it.
But on the other side of the ledger, you have the Espionage Act. The government is intensely arguing that publishing the specific classified operational details will actively jeopardize national security, it will compromise secret intelligence methods, and it will put American troops in immediate physical danger.
And the government didn't just ask nicely, right?
No. The Nixon administration actually sought and temporarily won a federal court injunction forcing the New York Times to literally cease publication of the documents.
Prior restraint. The government stopping the presses.
Exactly. The internal mechanics of how the Times handled that decision are just fascinating.
Wow.
Because their own legal counsel, their lawyers, initially advised strongly against publishing.
Really? The lawyer said no.
Yes, they feared massive criminal liability. They thought the reporters could go to jail, and it could mean the total financial destruction of the institution itself.
But the editors pushed back.
Intensely. The editors argued that failing to publish would render the newspaper entirely complicit in the government's deception.
Like, if you hide the lie, you were part of the lie.
Exactly. They argued it would fundamentally destroy the newspaper's credibility, and frankly, its entire purpose as an institution of a free society.
So what did they do?
They went forward. They meticulously, painstakingly reviewed all 7,000 pages, redacting immediate operational secrets like troop movements, while aggressively publishing the historical proof of the deception.
Wow.
And as we know, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in their favor, permanently cementing the principle that the press serves the governed, not the governors.
Serves the governed, not the governors.
Yeah.
It is such a massive triumph of the Fourth Estate.
It's the high watermark.
But, and this is a huge but, that triumph occurred in a very, very different economic reality than the one we live in today.
Night and day.
Right, because the New York Times in 1971, they were this highly profitable, untouchable institution. They could afford to mount a massive multi-million-dollar legal defense all the way to the Supreme Court. They essentially had a monopoly on their local advertising market.
They had incredibly deep pockets.
And this brings us crashing right back down into the current reality, because the noble philosophical ideals of the watchdog that we just talked about, they are currently fighting for sheer survival in a ruthless, hyper-competitive digital marketplace.
The ecosystem of outrage.
Right. We have to deconstruct the actual business model that sustains our modern information environment, because the transition from print to digital fundamentally destroyed the traditional revenue streams of journalism.
It wiped them out almost overnight. When classified advertising, the old help wanted and cars for sale sections at the back of the paper.
The things that actually paid the bills.
Right. When those moved to dedicated online platforms, like Craigslist, newspapers lost their entire financial bedrock. And simultaneously, the actual information, the news itself, became largely free to access online.
So if the news is free, how do the platforms that distribute our news, these massive social media conglomerates and search engines, how do they actually generate their billions in revenue?
Well, this is the core of it. The product they are selling is no longer the news itself. The product is us.
We are the product.
Exactly. The product is human attention. This is what we call the attention economy.
Okay, break down the attention economy for me.
So the single economic imperative of a digital platform, their only real goal is to capture your attention, keep you on their site or app for as long as humanly possible, and then sell that engagement time to corporate advertisers.
So they just want you to stay.
They just need you to stay. The metric of success for the platform is not whether you are well informed. It is strictly whether you are engaged.
And as we discussed way back at the beginning with the A/B testing of headlines, what drives the most engagement? Outrage.
Outrage is the highest octane fuel for engagement.
Because nuance is completely boring to the algorithm.
It puts the algorithm to sleep. Think about it. A slow, deeply researched, 5,000-word investigative piece detailing the complex bureaucratic failures of a local city zoning board.
Which might be incredibly vital to the actual functioning of your city.
Oh, it might be the most important story of the year for your local taxes. But it requires immense patience and significant cognitive effort to actually read and consume.
So people scroll past it.
Right. Conversely, a highly polarized, sensationalist, 10-second video clip that lacks all context, featuring two extreme politicians just screaming at each other.
Oh, that requires zero cognitive effort to consume.
Zero. And it triggers an immediate, visceral, emotional reward. You get angry, you hit share, it goes incredibly viral, it generates millions and millions of ad impressions for the platform.
So the algorithm economically rewards the cheap sensationalism, and it financially starves the nuanced investigation.
It systematically defunds the truth in favor of the drama.
Man, but I have to ask, is it really just the algorithm's fault?
Oh.
Because we love to point the finger at the software engineers in Silicon Valley, right? Oh, the algorithm is ruining society.
Oh.
But studies on things like the backfire effect and confirmation bias, they suggest a much darker truth about us.
Yes, they do. The mirror is hard to look into.
Like, studies show that even when people are intentionally, politely exposed to really well-reasoned arguments from an opposing political viewpoint, they almost rarely change their minds.
Almost never.
In fact, they often double down. They become even more entrenched in their original belief. So the algorithm isn't actually forcing us to be polarized. It is simply providing a highly efficient delivery mechanism for what our human psychology already craves, which is validation.
That is a critical pushback. And you are entirely right. The algorithm is just a mirror, and it is reflecting our own cognitive frailties right back at us.
Wow.
We experience something called cognitive dissonance when we encounter information that contradicts our deeply held beliefs. It is physically and psychologically uncomfortable to be told we are wrong.
Nobody likes it.
No. So to resolve that extreme discomfort, we instinctively, subconsciously seek out information that just confirms what we already believe.
We want the warm, comforting blanket of being told we are right.
Exactly. We want to be told we are the good guys and our enemies are the bad guys. And these massive recommendation algorithms, they are perfectly designed to wrap that warm blanket as tightly around us as possible.
So how does it actually trap us?
Well, if you click on 3 articles in a row that present a very specific political ideology, the algorithm aggressively notes your preference. It recognizes that showing you a contrary viewpoint next might cause you a flash of cognitive dissonance, and you might close the app.
And if you close the app, they lose ad revenue.
Exactly. So to absolutely maximize your time on the platform, it just begins to quietly filter out any dissenting opinions. It surrounds you entirely with content, commentators, and news sources that perfectly align with your existing worldview.
So you are basically placed inside a filter bubble.
Yes. You enter an echo chamber.
I often think of this modern media landscape not as a big open public square anymore, but as this massive, endlessly fragmented apartment building.
I like that analogy.
Like in the past, despite really intense political disagreements, society generally shared a common baseline of facts. We all lived in the same epistemic universe.
Right. We might have violently disagreed on the solution to a problem, but we generally agreed that the problem itself existed.
Yes. We shared a common narrative reality, which was largely curated by those few dominant media institutions we talked about. And sure, it was an imperfect, often very exclusionary reality, but it functioned as a cohesive baseline for the country.
We all watched the same evening news.
Exactly. But today, the algorithms have essentially moved everyone into their own bespoke, entirely soundproofed apartments.
Soundproofed is the key word there.
Right. So in my echo chamber, the news feed tells me every single minute of the day that my political faction is incredibly righteous, the economy is recovering beautifully, and the latest piece of legislation is just a total triumph.
And you feel great about it.
I feel vindicated.
Yeah.
But in my neighbor's echo chamber, and remember, their feed is generated by the exact same platform, just using a different set of algorithms tailored to their clicks. Their feed tells them that my faction is deeply corrupt, the economy is on the verge of collapsing, and that same legislation is an absolute disaster that will ruin the country.
And because you are both surrounded entirely, 247, by voices that perfectly confirm your respective realities, you both believe that your perspective is just the obvious, undeniable consensus of all rational people everywhere.
Because everyone I see agrees with me.
Exactly. So naturally, you assume that anyone who disagrees with you is not just slightly mistaken. They must be acting in deliberate bad faith, or they must be incredibly stupid, or they must just be fundamentally evil.
This is the fragmentation of reality.
Yeah.
And honestly, it represents an existential threat to the very concept of a functioning democratic society.
It is the breaking of the democratic machine.
Because a democracy requires deliberation, right? It requires compromise. It actively requires citizens to occasionally look at a highly complex issue and say, you know what, I understand why the other side feels the way they do, even if I totally disagree with their policy.
Right, a basic level of civic empathy.
But how can we possibly have a meaningful conversation, let alone hammer out a political compromise, if we don't even share the basic foundational facts of the world anymore? If we cannot even agree on the what and the where, how do we ever negotiate the why?
We can't. That is the systemic crisis we are currently navigating. It's this incredible paradox. We possess the most powerful, expansive communication network in the history of humanity. We have instant access to more data, more history, and more rigorous investigative reporting than any previous generation could have imagined.
People are in our pockets.
Yet the structural financial incentives of the digital platforms actually delivering that information are actively, aggressively dismantling the common ground required to make any sense of it.
It is a profound, profound challenge. So for the listener who has been with us on this whole journey, how do we rebuild that architecture within our own minds?
It starts with awareness.
Let's trace the massive journey we have actually taken today, because we didn't just give you a list of vocabulary words to memorize, we really deconstructed the machinery in front of you.
We took the engine apart.
Right. We started by looking at how the infinite space of digital media turned simple headlines into these lab-engineered lures, specifically optimizing for our own evolutionary negativity bias.
Exploiting our inner caveman.
Exactly. Then we examined the massive difficulty of verifying those foundational 5 Ws in an era where AI can literally manufacture reality in 10 seconds. And we looked at how journalists have to painstakingly synthesize the visceral, raw data of the eyewitness with the abstract, systemic models of the expert.
Building that bridge between the micro and the macro.
Yes. Then we challenged the whole myth of pure objectivity, exploring how agenda setting and framing dictate not just how we think, but what we actually spend our days thinking about.
We mapped the dark arts.
We did. We mapped the complex, coordinated mechanics of modern disinformation campaigns, detailing exactly how fabricated lies are laundered through massive bot networks to hijack mainstream attention, exploiting our psychological truth default.
Turning our trust into a weakness.
And then we elevated our view all the way to the institutional level, examining the majestic but often agonizing responsibilities of the Fourth Estate. We analyzed the historical precedent of the Pentagon Papers, exploring that excruciating tension between the public's absolute right to know and the severe demands of national security.
The ultimate test of the watchdog.
And finally, we collided head-on with the harsh, undeniable economic realities of the attention economy, recognizing how algorithms literally financially reward outrage, how they exploit our innate confirmation bias, and how they trap us in these fragmented, highly polarized echo chambers.
It is a formidable landscape. It really is. But I firmly believe that understanding the intricate mechanics of a trap is the first and absolutely most vital step to avoiding it.
This matters profoundly. To you listening to this right now, this matters because when you wake up tomorrow morning and you look at your phone, that chaotic stream of notifications is no longer just a passive weather event that's happening to you.
You know, the glass is a lens now.
Exactly. You know it is a highly engineered ecosystem, and with the architecture we've explored in this deep dive today, you are no longer just a passive consumer. You have the critical lens to actually identify those algorithmic lures.
You can see the strings?
Yes. You understand the structural biases, and you understand the asymmetric warfare of disinformation. You are now equipped to actively seek out the slow-cooked synthesis of complex facts, rather than just gorging on the fast food of manufactured outrage.
You have the tools to demand better from the institutions that act as our watchdogs. And honestly, more importantly, you have the tools to demand better of your own cognitive habits.
And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought.
Okay.
Because we have spent this entire deep dive dissecting the failures of the media apparatus, and we've analyzed the manipulative algorithms of the massive tech platforms. We have asked how the fourth estate can possibly survive in a marketplace that financially starves complex investigation.
Right.
But perhaps the ultimate question isn't actually about the press at all.
What do you mean?
If the attention economy fundamentally relies on our impatience, and if these polarized echo chambers fundamentally rely on our desperate desire for intellectual comfort, what is our responsibility?
As citizens.
As citizens, does a truly functioning, resilient democracy require not just a free and independent press, but a fiercely patient, deeply critical, and intellectually courageous public? Think about that the next time you feel the overwhelming urge to reflexively share a headline that makes your blood boil.